We are live. Welcome to Wednesday night. It's about 7:25, so in about 5 minutes we'll get started here. This is Jason Weddington. This is Lessons from a Life in Magic, episode number 3. Excited to be here tonight. Hope you guys are doing well whenever you're watching this, whether you're going to watch it live, or whether you're going to watch it in the replay. Don't forget to go to versatileperformer.com and sign up for our email list. That way you'll get a reminder each and every week that these are coming up, so you'll be sure to either catch it live or again on the blog at versatileperformer.com. About 2 minutes away, guys. Just sitting here playing a little ukulele for you. This is a baritone ukulele. Getting ready for the weekly hangout session at 7:30. Just a couple more minutes, just about 2 minutes away, guys. All right, guys, it's about 1 minute away. It is 7:29. Getting ready to start promptly at 7:30. We're almost there. I'm excited about being here tonight. Tonight we're talking about something really cool. The last couple of weeks, our first week, we talked about character development. Last week we talked about creating a winning set. And this week we're going to talk about something that magicians are really interested in, and pretty excited about sharing some of my thoughts around this topic tonight. I think it's right about 7:30, so I'm going to go ahead and kick things off here. This is Lessons from a Life in Magic. Every single week on Wednesday nights at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, I come online, do a Google Hangout where I talk about some different tips, maybe some skills, techniques, share a little bit of my experience about how to become an amazing performer. Because that's really, I think, what we all want to do as magicians. We want to amaze and astound our audiences. We want to be amazing, and we want to amaze people. If people really want to be, I think people want to be amazed as well. I think the world is really, it needs some amazement sometimes with all the things going on in the world. So this week, We're going to be talking about learning sleight of hand. Some tips, some techniques, some tricks that I picked up over the years, some of the advice that I've gotten from other magicians over the years of learning sleight of hand. Now, when we think of sleight of hand, especially as magicians, some of the magicians we think of are like the great Di Vernon, the professor, right? Revolutionized close-up magic for all magicians everywhere, really. He took a completely different approach. And Di Vernon's approach was really all about being natural. And that's, I think, underlying all the concepts that I talk about tonight with learning sleight of hand. I think keeping Di's advice, or Day, depending upon where you're from, the professor, keeping his advice of being natural in mind. That should be the underlying concept always when we talk about learning sleight of hand and working on our sleight of hand. So, of course, Di Vernon, some stage manipulators may think of somebody like Cardini. And I think these two guys are really interesting in that Vernon's approach to sleight of hand, because he was fascinated with gambling techniques, so it was all about being natural and all about being able to fool somebody in fast company, people who were card players or were familiar with the props that you were using, being able to astound and amaze those people. And Cardini, he got his start, well, not his start, but where he practiced a lot of his manipulation was in the trenches during the Great World War. He was, I believe, don't take my word for this, but I believe he was in an infantry for England, and he was in trenches and wearing gloves, and he was known for his card manipulation while wearing gloves, and that's where he learned those techniques. So diverse ways of approaching magic, but underlying it, there was a naturalness to it. There was great skill. There was a lot of hard work. And now we have modern teachers, modern quote-unquote masters of sleight of hand, guys like my friend Eric Jones, who's a wonderful coin magician, equally skilled with a deck of cards, very smooth, has a wonderful approach and a wonderful touch when it comes to magic. Really, really amazing guy. And of course, my good friend Aaron Fisher, who teaches sleight of hand to magicians all over the world through his books, his lectures, and his online magic series. So everybody has a little bit of different approach to performing sleight of hand and to learning sleight of hand. And other modern masters like Armando Lucero, Richard Turner, Leonard Green, Juan Tamariz, the modern professor. I mean, these guys have revolutionized sleight of hand. They're revolutionizing sleight of hand, and they're instructing a brand new crop of young magicians. That's the beautiful thing about magic, is it reaches back so far into history, right up to cutting edge performers like Eric and Aaron. So kind of keep in mind that through magic, you're always wanting to express yourself. You're wanting to find your own voice. So even when you're learning from maybe somebody like Eric, or you're reading an old book from Di Vernon, or learning, studying the masters like Cardini or the modern masters like Aaron, remember you're finding your own voice. And especially nowadays with video technology and learning sleight of hand through video, there's not as much interpretation that I'm seeing in magic. There's a lot of mimicry, which is okay, and I think that's great early on. I think it's good that we mimic performers that have come before us, sleight of hand artists that have come before us. But I think through the written word and through interpreting things through your own filter, it gives a little bit more of a texture to sleight of hand. So kind of keep that in mind as you're on your path of learning sleight of hand. Now, really what makes these guys different? When you think about great sleight of hand masters, what really sets them apart from anybody else? Is it that they have natural talent? Maybe it's a learned skill, right? Maybe they're just more studious than other people. Is it diligent practice and rehearsal? Maybe it's a deep understanding of intention, of focus, and relaxation. Maybe. What do you guys think? Yeah. What did you say? All of these? Yes, exactly. It's a combination of all of these. Now, some people may argue and they say, oh, well, maybe I'm just not a naturally gifted sleight of hand artist. Well, I don't think that that actually truly exists. I think that's a mental state, maybe a person, and I don't want to say that they're necessarily lazy, but I'll put myself in the hot seat for a second. A few years ago, when I was um, performing magic, I used to get the compliment all the time at how dexterous I was, and that, oh, it must be very easy for me to be able to play a musical instrument. And I never thought that I was musically inclined. I really didn't. Didn't have a grasp of music. And it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years ago that I picked up the ukulele and started playing that I realized, holy cow, once you get interested in something, that really turns the tide. So if you're fascinated by something, and if you really want to spend the time to learn it, you can. I think natural talent is embedded in all of us. I think um, definitely learning the skill, and like I said, being able to either watch something visually and mimic it or interpret it through the written word is definitely a skill, and you can learn that skill. Of course, rehearsal and practice are paramount, and understanding the idea of intention, of focus, and relaxation. And again, my buddy Aaron Fisher in The Paper Engine, his great, fantastic book. I highly recommend it. He talks a lot about focus, intention, and relaxation. So if you're into card magic and you're into sleight of hand, I highly recommend my buddy Aaron's book, The Paper Engine. So I think it is a little bit of all of those different things, a combination, right? And when I started learning sleight of hand, and this is years and years and years and years ago, about 22 years ago, I got started, uh, really got interested in sleight of hand magic, and I'll tell you what did it for me. It was the world's greatest magic. I think it was the second special that they did years ago. There were these magic specials every single year, and many magicians would come on. And the very first time I ever saw a magician on TV in my adult life was during the world's greatest magic, and it was two magicians actually. Jeff McBride doing his great mime act and pulling cards out of the air left and right from literally thin air. I was amazed. I was flabbergasted. And Paul Gertner performing his cup and ball routine with the steel ball bearings. If you've never seen it, uh, go out, look for the video. It's just mind boggling. And those two effects really got me interested in learning sleight of hand. I went into a magic shop actually for a whole nother reason. I was taking martial arts to rehab an injury that I'd suffered playing volleyball, and wandered into a magic shop because the store that I was actually going into to get a weapon for my martial arts class was closed. And I mentioned to the owner, I said, "Hey, look, I saw this guy on TV pulling cards out of the air. Do you know how to do that? How can I learn how to do that?" And he pointed me to Jeff McBride's series. He said, "This is the guy that was doing it, and he teaches it." And then that just led one thing to another. That magician actually became my mentor, and became fascinated with sleight of hand, and couldn't get enough of it. Read every single book that I could get my hands on, and just ate it up. So, but the best advice, or some of the best advice that I received over the years of studying sleight of hand, I'm going to share with you guys. One of the biggest keys, right, is slow down. Now, there is a time when you're learning sleight of hand to speed up, but that comes later on. I kind of think of it like learning scales, playing the ukulele, right? When I first started out, learning the finger positions for G D, A minor, C, F. These were difficult positions to get my fingers into, and it took hours and hours and hours of practice of going slowly, of learning the positions and being able to move fluidly from one to another before I could really get it down. I think it's important too, as you're learning early on, to practice very slow, but then to speed up and try to do things as fast as you possibly can, because that trains your mind in a different way. So running through the slides very slow, very deliberate, but also speeding up occasionally, just like you would if you're a musician and you're learning scales, maybe on the piano or a guitar, or like I play the ukulele, learning on the ukulele. I go as fast as I can, but I'm also very deliberate about it. So that's really important. The second one, break the action into steps. And this is really key because when you break a sleight down into its individual moves, you can really begin to appreciate and understand what the artist was trying to accomplish who created the move. I think about the classic pass, for example. That's one of my favorite sleights to practice, or even the double lift, which a lot of people think is one of the easiest sleights in card magic, but I would argue it's one of the most difficult for a number of reasons. But thinking about the classic pass and breaking it down into the idea of getting the break, how to get the break effectively, how to move the bottom packet up instead of moving the top packet down. When you learn the classic pass, one of the common mistakes I see a lot of young magicians doing is that they think that the top packet is moving around that bottom packet. In reality, what's happening is that you're pulling the bottom packet up, and that top packet is essentially, it's almost a self-working action at that point. It's very mechanical. The top packet just moves out of the way very rapidly. So breaking a sleight down into its individual steps, getting focused onto how to approach the sleight, breaking it into those steps is really, really important. And even later on, when you're applying an effect applying a sleight in an effect, breaking a move into half moves. There was a magician years and years ago, early on, named Tim Starr, who kind of hipped me to the idea of breaking a sleight that you would normally perform in one fluid action into half moves. And that further hides the sleight, but it only really works if you understand what each step, what each section of that sleight is supposed to be accomplishing. So it's really important, slow down, take your time learning it, and break that action into steps. Now the third one, there's just absolutely no way around this. Practice, practice, practice. There is no way to learn sleight of hand if you don't enjoy practice. It's really impossible. You have to have fallen in love with these micro moves that no one is supposed to see, but for some reason gives you such an immense joy in practicing and performing. I remember learning a sleight known as the Mercury card fold, where you're secretly folding a card. And I would practice, I would use my old decks of cards and just practice, folding cards, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of folded cards lying around me. And I just remember how joyful it was learning the one-handed shuffle, and the first time that the cards wove together and then sprang all over the floor, and thinking, I'm almost there. You really do have to love to practice. So I encourage you to find your joy in practice. Find what it is that you're wanting to get out of it, and just jump in with both feet. It's one of the most rewarding things as a magician, I think, that you can do, is to really practice and hone hone your skill with sleight of hand. You don't have to be a sleight of hand master, but I think having a good, firm foundation with sleight of hand is a really, really positive thing. And in this section, rehearse. Rehearsal is different from practice in that practice, we're breaking things down. We're moving very slowly. We're very deliberate. Sometimes we're very fast and we're running at breakneck speed, but we're really trying to understand what the slide is accomplishing, where it's starting, how we get into it, the cover in the middle, and then at the end, getting out of the slide, what the finish of the slide is supposed to look like. So rehearsal is different from practice in that you're putting all of the elements together. Like I said, in the first week in our Lessons from a Life in Magic, I talked about character development. You're taking in rehearsal, you're taking your character and you're applying that to, you're taking the sleight of hand that you're practicing, you're applying it to your character. Last week we talked about creating a set and these different effects, and you're putting the sleights and the effects, the structure of all of these things together into your rehearsal. And one very important key, especially when we're talking about rehearsing routines and effects that rely on sleight of hand, one of the key things is rehearse for things to not go right. Let me tell you, any magician who has done any amount of magic, if he tells you that every single trick that he has performed has always gone completely 100% right, they are lying to you. Flat out lying. It just doesn't happen. Just the nature of being a human being, being in different performing situations, and over my 22 years of a career, I have been in so many different, I've performed close-up magic at a wake, I've performed in theme parks, I've performed on television, I've performed on the street, busking. Not every magic trick, not every sleight is going to go smoothly. Sometimes the cards, if you're doing card magic, the cards might stick together. Sometimes, if you've been doing magic a really long time, your brain wanders. Many times in my show at Walt Disney World, I would be in the middle of an effect, thinking to myself, oh goodness, Jay, you're really hungry. Did you remember to eat today? What do you think you want for dinner later on? And you lose your place, and it's almost as if you wake up in the middle of your own show and you're like, oh my goodness, where the heck am I at? So practice and rehearse for things to go awry. Rehearse for people to grab your hands at a crucial moment. Rehearse for people to see something and figure out a way of how to be prepared for maybe them seeing that something is going to go wrong, right? Or that, so maybe they see something and it's gone wrong, and figure out a way of getting around those things. So rehearse for things to not go right. As always, though, you definitely want to rehearse for things to go well, and you want to be practiced, and you want to be polished, and you want to be smooth with your slides. But that doesn't always happen in the real world. So be prepared for the real world. Don't be prepared for just practicing in front of a mirror. And that brings me to another point of practicing sleight of hand in front of a mirror. You can practice in front of mirrors. You can have your close friends that you trust watch you as you're practicing, or maybe it's in front of a video camera. My personal feeling about practicing in front of a mirror is it's good for understanding micro moves and getting a glimpse of head on, maybe to the side a little bit if you have a nice trifold mirror that you practice with. But early on, when you're learning sleight of hand, it will give you a false sense of perception, a false sense of depth when you get out in front of a live audience. If you've only rehearsed and you've only practiced seeing your sleights in front of a mirror, you will be thrown off because you don't have that mirror sitting in front of you. And now there's this vast audience, it feels like, and it will really throw off your perception. And it's a very strange feeling. I'm not sure I can put it into words exactly, but don't rely on a mirror as 100% of a way to practice and rehearse your sleight of hand. So keep that in mind. Now, there's an important thing about magic, and that it happens in our minds. It's not happening in our hands. And the sleight of hand artists, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone else, especially when it comes to like learning new moves and searching for the coolest, the newest, the hippest move that's out there. Sleight of hand is a means to an effect, and that effect is occurring inside the mind of the spectator. It has little to do with what we're doing with our hands. And why I say that is because of the way that the mind interprets what it sees can be very, very different from the sleight that you're performing, right? So, for example, again, the classic pass, right? Some people may see the classic pass and they see maybe a slight movement of the hands as they dip, and they might think, oh, he just fluttered the cards. Other people may put it together and think, oh, he just cut the cards, or I didn't really see what happened, but I noticed a slight movement. The way that the mind interprets what you're doing is different from spectator to spectator to spectator. You can have a group of people watch you do an effect, and if you take those three people and, or I should say maybe not the group, or we'll just say three people, if you take those three people, talk to them individually, they're going to see three different things. They're not going to see the exact same thing. So magic definitely happens in our minds, not in our hands. Kind of reminds me of the M&M commercial. Chocolate doesn't melt in your mouth, or it doesn't melt in your hands, it melts in your mouth. The thing about sleight of hand too is that, in my opinion, we need to be freeing our minds from the technique. And I think about Bruce Lee, the famous martial artist, and he came up with Jeet Kune Do, his way of no way, when he was injured. He suffered a back injury, I believe, and wasn't able to move. And in his mind, he realized that the thing that was holding most martial artists back was adherence to the technique, right? And what his approach to martial arts was find the technique that gets you from A to B in the most efficient way. So relax on the technique. The foundation needs to be there for sure. But at some point, you need to free yourself from those techniques. So how do you do that? Well, I have a few suggestions on ways that as sleight of hand artists that we can get around the technique, right? One of them is practice while you're occupied doing something else. For example, watching television or watching a movie. Maybe you're reading a book, but doing something while you're practicing, while you're rehearsing the sleight. Now, this definitely comes a little later on after you've mastered the basic technique of what you're attempting to accomplish. Again, I'll go back to the classic pass. So when you're attempting to learn this classic pass, once you've got the basic technique down, practice it over and over and over while you're reading a book, while you're rehearsing your script, while you're watching television, getting your mind off of the action and moving it onto something else. That way, you're not paying attention to the sleight necessarily, and you can pay attention to something else. This helps later on with misdirection or directing someone's attention. So practice your sleight of hand while you're doing something else. Very, very key. Another technique to move away from technique is to switch to your non-dominant hand when you're practicing. And I do this really especially with coin magic. I practice every sleight that I do in my non-dominant hand as well as my dominant hand, even if I don't use it in performance in front of my audiences. For example, the retention pass with a coin. I use the retention pass and I do it solely with, I execute the sleight with my right hand, but I do practice it with my non-dominant left hand just so that I can create new neural pathways and new mental pathways of doing the sleight. Another thing here too is the third point, which is use visualization techniques. And what do I mean by this? It's see it to do it. See it in your mind. Practice doing sleight of hand in your mind. Because when you can do it in your mind, you can actuate it into physical reality. I know it sounds a little woo-woo maybe, but it's absolutely true. When I used to play sports, one of the things that I learned was how to visualize with shooting free throws. Because you'd have a crowd of people in the stands that were, let's be honest, very distracting. And one of the techniques that we learned was how to see the ball leave our hand and go through the basket, right, without actually practicing the technique. And what's interesting, it's kind of like active imagination or dreaming while you're awake, right? And what really works is, I should say, what really works is what causes this to work is that the brain can't differentiate its the action in your mind versus the action of being done in the physical world. When you imagine doing something, your body will respond in exactly the same way as if you were actually doing something. Think about like when you're dreaming and you wake up and you're panting. Maybe you've been running away from a scary monster or something like that. You're panting in the physical world because your brain is creating that reality for you. So using visualization with sleight of hand, seeing yourself performing the sleight, seeing yourself executing the sleight flawlessly will help your body actuate that in the physical world. And you can zoom in to minor details in the sleight. For example, talk about the classic pass again. Thinking about getting the break, you can blow that up in your mind gigantic, and you can see how easy it is to just very naturally get that break. You can see very easily how to just, with a slight movement, you can move that entire bottom packet up and over top of the top packet, moving it around. So using visualization techniques when learning sleight of hand is really, really key. So what's next? Well, if you guys have any questions, always ask me, right? I get a few questions through the email from the site, I should say. There's a form on our site. If you go to theversatileperformer.com, on our contact page, we have a form, and you can fill out, either leave us a comment or ask us a question. And since I posted last week that I was going to be talking about sleight of hand, one of the questions that I got was, what do you do if someone sees what you do when you're in an effect and you're performing it and someone sees your sleight, right? My advice is to acknowledge it. Don't try to run away from it and say, oh no, you didn't see that, right? The person knows what they saw. So maybe they caught the classic pass, or maybe they saw that there was, maybe they saw what was going on with a double turnover. Acknowledge it and go, yeah, well, it's not really magic. But the secret there is take that opportunity. Take that opportunity to maybe get a little ahead of them, right? Maybe in the offbeat, you're loading an extra card underneath there. Or maybe you're saying, oh yeah, I did have 2 cards there, and you're using the moment, that acknowledgement of, okay, you caught me, you saw what was going on, using that to get ahead of them so that you can fool them again. Again, I think practice and rehearsal are so key when it comes to minimizing that happening. People are going to catch you. That is just an inevitability of performing magic in an intimate situation, whether you're doing restaurants or you're busking. People see things. Not everyone is fooled. It's an impossibility. Even the great masters, will tell you this. So practice, rehearse. Again, rehearse for things to go wrong. Rehearse and practice for people seeing a sleight. Practice, rehearse ways of getting out of those situations, right? It's as important to practice things going right as it is to practice for things going wrong. So those are really the areas that I think are key when we're talking about sleight of hand. So remember, uh, slow down when you're learning sleight of hand. There are moments to speed up. Practice running through them very rapidly, very quickly, very high speed, just to be able to get your brain working in a way of like, oh, I have to go fast and done. For example, with the classic pass, Vernon always talks about the pass needs to be done as the hands meet. So in that just split second of when the hands meet, that's when the sleight is being accomplished. It's very, very fast. But the only way to get there is to break it down really, really slow. Break the action into steps. Take it step by step. Really understand what each aspect of the sleight is supposed to accomplish. Think about the classic pass or the ghost count, which is commonly called the Elmsley count. Things like that, understanding what each section of the sleight is supposed to accomplish, what the audience is supposed to be seeing, is a really, really important aspect to it. Fall in love with practice. Practice, practice, practice. Nothing will get you further with sleight of hand than really falling in love with practice. So I encourage everyone, fall in love with it. Find what it is that you love about sleight of hand. Find something and just really get into practicing it. Set aside time, dedicated time to study sleight of hand and practice it. Again, and understanding the difference between practice and rehearsal. Very different things, very different ideas. Understanding intention, focus, and relaxation in a sleight. What is the desired effect that a sleight is going to produce, right? Where is the focus in the sleight? What should an audience be looking at? Where should their minds, their attentions be focused? When to relax, right? One of the great magicians used to talk about, Max Malini. He would talk about, how long do you wait for a sleight or for an effect to be pulled off? You wait a week if you have to. So understand relaxation, when it's time to not be so focused, because those are the moments, I like to think of those are the moments in between the magic, in between the sleights, that are so key. You can create your focus, your intense focus, and then you relax, you release the tension, and that's a moment that can be very powerful and can aid you in understanding and learning sleight of hand. So again, practicing sleight of hand while you're doing something else, right? Practice the visualization techniques. Very, very key. So all of these things together, freeing yourself from the technique of sleight of hand, getting away from the technique of sleight of hand, and not having so much of a focus on it, is going to take you really far with sleight of hand. And I know it sounds kind of antithetical that you want to get away from the technique of sleight of hand by learning sleight of hand, but I think that's really ultimately the goal. When sleight of hand becomes so natural for you that it's almost easier to perform a sleight than it is to actually perform the real action. And again, that's another key to learning sleight of hand, is that, again, with the visualization technique, understanding what it would look like if you were really doing what you say that you were going to do. If you really were losing a card in the center of the pack, what would that look like? How would you push it in? How would you fairly do that? Try to mimic those actions with your sleight. With coin magic, one of my favorite vanishes is a classic palm toss vanish taught by Albert Goshman. Understanding what it really looks like if you were throwing a coin from one hand into the other, catching it, and if it were to disappear, what would that really look like? mimic those actions, because when you're able to condition an audience to see an action as natural, as normal, the sleight is that much more invisible and that much more fluid. So those are the keys, I think, to really learning sleight of hand. And again, if you guys have questions, there's a chat box off to the side. Whenever we do the Google Live Hangouts, there's the chat box is open. You can, off to the left-hand side, just run your cursor. The chat should come up. I believe it's the blue icon. You can type in there, or you go on our website, onto the forum. I get a couple of questions each week, and I either respond to them via email, or I answer them here on the live chat. You can also tweet me questions. You can always tweet me. When you join these weekly hangouts, each week I'm going to be doing a different topic, right? And like I said, you can tweet me. You can catch me on Facebook. Any way that you want to reach out to me, I'm here to help anyone who wants help to learn how to be a more amazing performer. Over the years, I've gotten such joy out of magic, and I want to just share that with the community. So subscribe to this YouTube channel, Jason Wethington. I'll be putting the recorded Google Hangout up online. It'll also be over on our blog at theversatileperformer.com. You can sign up there, and each week I'll send you an email reminding you of this. You'll get other cool stuff, and right now I'm giving away a couple of magic effects. A pen through quarter routine that's really, really cool is the featured effect called Who Wants to Be the Firebug. Awesome effect that's been with me for a long while. Engage with me on Twitter. You can always tweet me at Jason Wethington, at Jay Wethington, I should say. I'm always open to asking questions. I'm on there at least once or twice a day, tweeting and engaging with people. And you can always connect with me on Facebook, send me a message through there, or just post a question to my wall. I'd be happy to answer it. So I really appreciate you guys being here. See you guys next week, July 8th. I'm going to be back here live, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And next week we're going to be talking tips on how to use your voice to enhance your performances. We're going to be going over a lot of different things, some voice exercises, learning how to project, how to alternate our voices, raising them, lowering them, getting quieter to bring people in, or maybe even getting louder to emphasize a point, but learning how to use your voice during your performance to enhance them. So really appreciate you guys watching. Look forward to seeing you here next time. Share this if you're watching it. Share this with your friends. Share this with your social media groups. The more the merrier that we get, guys, every single week. I feel like we're growing, and it's fantastic. I really enjoy doing these, and I really enjoy giving back to the community. So thank you guys very much. Hope you have a wonderful, magical evening and a brilliant rest of your week. Take care, guys. Have a good night.